I hired her to defend me, but somewhere between the late-night meetings and the way she saw straight through me, I realized the real danger wasn't the case, it was how deeply she was getting under my skin. The story begins the moment the narrator steps into Ms. Hyojin Park's law office, an elegant room filled with quiet warmth rather than the cold severity he expected from someone with her reputation. Bookshelves line the walls, their spines worn and familiar, and soft afternoon light filters through tall windows, giving everything a calm, amber glow. But none of that is what stops him in his tracks. It's her. Hyojin sits at her desk with the kind of confidence that doesn't need to be announced. 42, refined, poised, her presence fills the room without ever demanding it. Her dark hair is pinned neatly, a few loose strands softening the sharp professionalism of her appearance. She looks up from a document, and the moment her gaze lands on him, he feels as if she sees more than she should. Not just the facts of his case. She gestures for him to sit with a small, welcoming smile, the kind that is polite on the surface but warm underneath. "You must be nervous," she says gently, not mocking, just observant. "Most people are, their first time here." He tries to deny it, fumbling for composure. But she tilts her head, eyes soft but knowing. "You're trying too hard to look calm," she says. "Relax. You don't have to impress me." The words hit him harder than he expects. Something about the way she speaks, steady, sure, a little teasing, unsettles him in the most unexpected way. She reads him with the expertise of someone who has spent half a lifetime watching people unravel their truths, yet she does it without cruelty. If anything, her insight feels strangely reassuring. While she asks him about the details of his situation, her tone remains measured and thoughtful. She listens closely, the kind of listening that makes him feel like every word matters. Whenever he hesitates, she softens her voice. Whenever he over-explains, she gently redirects him. Then, in the middle of her notes, she leans forward to pass him a form. Her fingertips brush his, barely a second, barely a touch, but warm, steady, intentional in a way that sends a quiet shock up his arm. He tries to ignore it, but she notices his reaction immediately. There's the faintest hint of amusement in her eyes, a silent acknowledgement that she felt the shift too. As the meeting continues, he finds himself studying her more than he should, the calm rise and fall of her breath, the slight smile she wears when she finds something he says unexpectedly honest, the way she taps her pen lightly against her thumb when she's thinking. She carries herself with a quiet grace that makes it impossible to look away. When their consultation ends, she stands and walks him to the door. Just before he leaves, she pauses close enough that he can feel the subtle warmth radiating from her. "You're interesting," she says softly, almost to herself. Then she looks directly into his eyes, her voice low, steady. "I understand people quickly. Especially the ones who try to hide." It's not flirtation. Not quite. But it is the first moment he realizes. She sees him more clearly than he sees himself. Their second meeting arrives sooner than he expects. He tells himself it's because of the case, because things need clarification, because there are forms to sign, because any responsible adult would follow up quickly. But a small, hidden part of him knows he's going back for another reason. He wants to see her again. When he enters her office this time, Hyojin is standing by the window, reviewing a stack of papers. Sunlight outlines her figure in a soft glow, catching the faint strands of silver in her hair, subtle, elegant, something she wears with a confidence younger women often try to imitate. She looks over her shoulder when she hears him, and the calm smile that appears feels familiar now. Warm in a very specific way. "You're right on time," she says, stepping forward with a graceful ease. "I like that." He sits across from her, trying to appear composed, but she sees the tension in his posture within seconds. She always does. She folds her hands on the desk, watching him with a look that feels both analytical and strangely gentle. "You're nervous," she observes softly. He tries to laugh it off, but she raises one eyebrow. "I know the difference between stress and other kinds of tension." The way she says it, calm, matter of fact, makes his pulse jump. He wonders if she's teasing him, but her tone is too smooth, too steady. This is simply how she speaks, with disarming honesty. Throughout the meeting, she notices everything. Every shift in his breathing. Every time he taps his foot. Every moment he glances at her hands instead of her eyes. At one point, while explaining a complicated legal detail, she stops suddenly and tilts her head at him. "You avoid eye contact when you're uncomfortable," she says. "But you look directly at me when you want reassurance." He freezes. She smiles slowly, knowingly, the corners of her mouth curling upward in the softest, most devastating way. "See," she adds gently. "You're doing it right now." His face warms, and she pretends to return to her notes, but he catches the slight, satisfied glimmer in her eyes. She's too perceptive, too attentive, and it affects him far more than it should. As the meeting ends, she stands and walks him to the door again, a small gesture, but one that feels surprisingly personal. She reaches out to guide him through the doorway, placing her hand lightly on his arm, just above the elbow. Her touch is steady, warm, lingering just long enough that he feels it even after she pulls away. "You carry your tension here," she says, tapping the same spot gently with her fingertips. "Try to relax. You deserve to breathe." It's such a simple comment. Such a small touch. Yet it leaves his chest tight in a way he can't fully explain. Before he leaves, she steps just a little closer, close enough that her perfume, subtle and sophisticated, slips into the space between them. "I'll see you again soon," she says quietly. Not a question. Not even a suggestion. A certainty, as if she already knows he'll come back. And she's right. Because as he walks out of her office, one truth becomes impossible to ignore. She's getting under his skin, and he has absolutely no idea how to stop her. The week takes a difficult turn, an unexpected complication in his case. A misunderstanding that leaves him anxious and unsure. By the time he reaches out to Hyojin, his voice is tight with stress he can't hide. She listens quietly on the phone before saying, "Don't go home yet. Meet me outside." Her tone is gentle, steady, no judgment, no impatience. Just calm direction. He finds her waiting near the entrance of her office building, coat draped over one arm, hair slightly tousled by the evening breeze. She gives him a simple nod, then gestures down the street. "Come. You need a break. And I need caffeine." She leads him to a small, tucked-away cafe, the kind of place lit by warm lamps and soft music humming low in the background. The moment they step inside, the world outside feels distant. Safe. Steady. Contained. They sit in a corner booth, close enough that their knees almost brush under the table. Hyojin loosens the collar of her blouse, sets her glasses aside, and exhales a long, tired breath he's never seen her release in the office. "This job demands too many masks," she says quietly, stirring her coffee with slow, thoughtful motions. "Sometimes I forget how heavy they get." It's the first vulnerable crack in her composure, and he feels strangely honored that she's showing it to him. He admits his fears, how everything feels like it's closing in, how he hates not knowing what will happen. He speaks hesitantly at first, but she listens with full attention, leaning slightly forward, her hands wrapped around her cup for warmth. Every now and then, she nods small, reassuring gestures that make it easier to continue. When he stumbles over a sentence, she reaches across the table to slide him a napkin, and their fingers brush, just a soft, fleeting contact. But it's enough to ground him, enough to quiet the frantic beating in his chest. "You're too hard on yourself," she says gently. "You take blame that doesn't belong to you." Her voice is softer now, almost protective. "You don't have to pretend strength with me. I see more than you think." The words settle deep, warm in places he didn't know needed warmth. He studies her face, how the cafe's amber light softens the lines at the corners of her eyes, how her expression shifts between thoughtful and quietly tender. She's beautiful, but not in a loud way. She's beautiful in a way that feels lived in, earned, steady. A beauty shaped by years of carrying people's burdens and still finding space to care. As their conversation unfolds, something shifts, not dramatically, but undeniably. The distance between them feels smaller. The atmosphere feels gentler. Her voice lowers when she speaks to him, her tone almost instinctively comforting. Near the end, she reaches out almost without thinking and lays her hand on his for a brief moment. Not bold, not intimate, just warm. Human. Whatever happens next, she says softly, you won't face it alone. He nods, unable to speak for a second. When they leave the cafe, the evening air feels different. Lighter. He walks beside her, matching her pace without realizing it. And somewhere between the soft glow of streetlights and the quiet rhythm of their steps, he becomes aware of a truth he can't ignore anymore. He's beginning to need her. Not just as a lawyer, but as someone who makes him feel unbreakable for the first time in a long time. The next few days are a blur of paperwork and uncertainty. A sudden miscommunication in the case sends the narrator into a spiral, nothing catastrophic, but serious enough that he feels the ground slip beneath him. Without thinking, he rushes to Hyojin's office, heart pounding, throat tight. It's late. The building is nearly empty. Her office door is half closed, a warm slice of light spilling into the hallway. He knocks hesitantly. Come in, she calls, voice tired but steady. When he steps inside, the sight of her nearly stops him. She's still in her work clothes, but her usually immaculate hair has come loose, a few strands falling against her cheek. Her blazer is draped over her chair, sleeves rolled back slightly, revealing faint tension in the way she holds her shoulders. She looks up at him, and the exhaustion in her expression softens instantly into something more tender, more instinctive. What happened? She asks, rising from her chair with a worried crease between her brows. He explains the misunderstanding, voice shaky despite his attempts to stay collected. As he speaks, she steps closer, not with the polished poise of a professional, but with the quiet urgency of someone who genuinely cares. When he finishes, she doesn't speak right away. She simply places a hand on his shoulder, fingers warm and gentle through the thin fabric of his shirt. Her thumb brushes a slow, soothing arc, an unconscious gesture that speaks louder than anything she could say. Look at me, she murmurs. He lifts his eyes to hers. She holds his gaze steadily, with a softness that feels like a physical embrace. You're safe, she says, her voice low. This isn't your fault, and it's not going to fall apart. I promise you. He exhales shakily, the tension slowly unwinding. Her hand doesn't move. If anything, it lingers a second longer, grounding him in a way that feels dangerously comforting. Hyojin seems to realize it too. There's a flicker in her expression, something unguarded, almost fragile. She steps back half a pace, but she doesn't fully retreat. Instead, she reaches for a stack of documents on her desk, flipping through them with forced concentration. I shouldn't worry like that, she says quietly, almost to herself. It's unprofessional. He catches the slight tremor in her voice, the wavering line between who she is supposed to be and what she is beginning to feel. She sits beside him rather than across from him, spreading the documents between them. Their shoulders nearly touch. She speaks softly, explaining the misunderstanding and how it can be fixed. Her tone is reassuring, but there's a new intimacy woven into it, a warmth she no longer bothers to hide. At one point, he leans forward to read a line, and she instinctively places her hand on his arm again, steadying him with a touch that is both protective and unintentionally affectionate. When the situation is finally clarified, he lets out a long breath. She watches him with a look that's different now, warmer, deeper, laced with something she's no longer able to mask. Don't come here alone when you're scared, she says softly. Call me. I want to know. It's the closest she's come to admitting anything. And though the words are simple, the emotion behind them fills the room like a quiet confession. In that moment, he realizes something has shifted. Not just for him, but for her too. After the scare in part 4, something subtly but unmistakably changes between them. It doesn't happen with a confession or a dramatic moment. It happens in the quiet choices, hers mostly. Hyojin begins asking him to stay longer after meetings. Not because the case demands it, he can tell, but because she wants him there. Some evenings, the building is nearly empty when they sit together in her office. The overhead lights are dimmed to a warm glow, and the city hums quietly through the window. The space feels different at night, less formal, less guarded. It feels almost like neutral territory where they are no longer lawyer and client, but something softer. She sits beside him now, not across from him. A small choice, but a meaningful one. Their knees occasionally brush when they lean over documents, and each time it happens, neither of them moves away. She pretends to focus on the paperwork, but he notices the way her breath catches, the slight pause in her explanation. And sometimes, when she walks behind him to correct something he's written, the sleeve of her blouse glides lightly against his shoulder. The touch is accidental, yet somehow intimate, soft fabric meeting warm skin, sending a quiet spark down his spine. One evening stands out more than the others. They're sitting close, reviewing a timeline together. He's speaking through a detail when he stops mid-sentence, realizing she isn't looking at the paper anymore. She's looking at him. Really looking, eyes soft, expression thoughtful, as though she's memorizing the shape of his face, and isn't aware she's doing it. When she notices he's stopped talking, she draws in a quick breath and looks down, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear in a rare display of flustered motion. "You're distracting," she murmurs. Her tone is quiet, not playful, not teasing. It's a confession wrapped in restraint. He tries to smile, tries to diffuse the tension, but she shakes her head slightly, still avoiding his eyes. "I shouldn't say that," she adds. "It's inappropriate." But the words don't undo what she's already revealed. They hang in the space between them, warm and heavy. To shift the energy, she stands to gather more documents from the cabinet. But when she returns, her composure is still slightly off. She sets the papers down too slowly, as though grounding herself. He watches her, noticing things he never paid attention to before, the way she presses her lips together when she's thinking, the subtle rise and fall of her breath when she's trying to calm herself, the vulnerability in her eyes. So different from the razor-sharp confidence she shows the world. When she sits again, their shoulders touch lightly. She doesn't pull away. At one point, he rests his arm on the table, and she, without seeming to realize it, places her hand near his close enough that her fingers graze the back of his hand with each small movement of her pen. It becomes harder to pretend the closeness is accidental. Later, when they pack up for the night, she stands near him, too close to be casual, not close enough to be intentional. Her voice is soft, almost fragile. "There are lines I'm supposed to keep," she says. "But you make them feel thin." He doesn't reply. He doesn't need to. The way he looks at her, steady and quiet, says enough. She exhales slowly, her eyes brushing over his face before she turns away. And in that moment, he understands. She's fighting something she already knows she's losing. And he's falling in deeper with every passing second. The final hearing is over, and the tension in the courtroom has finally dissolved. Papers have been signed, arguments delivered, and the verdict rendered. Relief washes over the narrator in a way he didn't expect, not just for himself, but for Hyojin, who has carried this case with a quiet intensity that he's admired from the first day. He finds her alone in the hallway, leaning against the wall, her posture relaxed but tired. The lighting catches the gentle curve of her cheek and the subtle shadows under her eyes, evidence of long days spent in pursuit of justice. For a moment, he feels as though he's seeing her fully, not the composed lawyer she shows the world, but the human being underneath, strong, capable, and unexpectedly fragile. "Thank you," he says softly, his voice almost lost in the empty corridor. "For everything." She steps closer, closer than ever before, and the faint scent of her perfume, subtle, elegant, lingering, fills the space between them. She straightens his jacket with meticulous attention, but her fingers linger, brushing his collarbone, fingertips tracing the line of his shoulder. The touch is light, professional in appearance, but the warmth and steadiness speak volumes. "You're welcome," she murmurs, her voice lower, quieter than usual. It carries a note of intimacy he hasn't heard before. For a moment, neither speaks. The world seems to shrink around them, the distant echoes of footsteps in the hallway fading into nothing. He feels the quiet pull of her gaze, steady, deliberate, unflinching. And he realizes she's been feeling this too, something unspoken, undeniable, growing quietly with every meeting, every touch, every shared coffee. Then she speaks, almost in a whisper, and the words catch him off guard. You know, she pauses, tilting her head slightly, her eyes meeting his. There's a flicker of mischief in her gaze, but it's tempered by sincerity. You're guilty. He freezes, unsure whether he's misheard. She takes a slow step closer, the distance between them now charged, and allows a faint, knowing smile to curve her lips. Guilty of getting under my skin. Her hand rises almost instinctively, brushing lightly against his cheek. The touch is feather-light, steady, deliberate, not a kiss, not even bold, but intimate enough to make his pulse leap and the world shrink to just the space between them. He searches her eyes for any hint of jest, any retreat, but finds none. Only warmth. Only honesty. The corridor seems to hold its breath. His chest tightens, not with fear, but with the full weight of unspoken longing finally acknowledged. She slowly lowers her hand, letting it rest near his shoulder as if afraid to fully break the spell. Her voice softens further. I didn't plan on it. But you've managed to sneak past all my defenses. He swallows, barely able to speak. He wants to say something, anything, but the vulnerability in her tone and the sincerity in her gaze make words unnecessary. For the first time, the unspoken tension between them is acknowledged. There is no rush, no dramatic confession. Just the steady, undeniable realization that what they feel for each other has grown beyond hesitation or propriety. And in that quiet moment, suspended between professionalism and desire, they both understand. This is real. A few days after the courtroom drama ends, they agree to meet outside the confines of offices and legal documents, a park. Quiet and familiar, with late autumn sunlight casting everything in gold and amber. The crisp air carries the faint rustle of leaves underfoot, and the distant hum of the city seems to soften, allowing them a space that belongs solely to the two of them. Hyojin is waiting by a wrought iron bench, her posture relaxed but careful, her coat wrapped snugly around her. The years of her composure remain, but there's an ease to her movements that wasn't present in her office, a subtle vulnerability, the kind that invites trust. She smiles as he approaches, the warmth of it making his chest ache with an unexpected tenderness. They walk together along the winding paths, side by side. Their conversation is light at first, deliberate in its ordinariness, yet underneath every word there is an unspoken intimacy, a quiet rhythm that seems to acknowledge everything they have been through together. Occasionally, their arms brush, softly, casually, each touch lingering just long enough to send an electric warmth through him. After a while, they pause near a cluster of benches. Hyojin turns to him, and the golden light catches the subtle highlights in her hair. There's a pause, a small breath, as if both are waiting for permission to step beyond mere companionship. Then, gently, he reaches for her hand. She doesn't pull away. Her fingers interlace with his naturally, easily, as if they had been made to fit together. She leans slightly toward him, just enough for her shoulder to rest against his upper arm. Her eyes soften, and she exhales a quiet, steadying breath. If we do this, she murmurs, her voice almost lost in the gentle rustle of the trees, we do it honestly. With patience. With care. He nods, squeezing her hand gently, feeling the warmth and steadiness of her presence. I promise, he says, and the words feel heavier than any legal argument, richer than any shared coffee, because they carry intention, commitment, and understanding. They sit on the bench for a while, letting the silence speak. His shoulder brushes hers again, her hand still resting in his. He notices the faintest curve of a smile on her lips, the subtle glimmer of trust in her eyes, and the way she relaxes into his presence. She is no longer the untouchable lawyer he first met. She is Hyojin, fully human, fully vulnerable, and fully present. They talk about small things, the way the city looks in autumn, a book she's reading, a song that reminded him of her. And with every word, every laugh, Every glance, the gap between them, the difference in age, experience, and life perspective feels less like a barrier and more like a bridge. As the sun begins to set, they rise together. Their hands remain intertwined, a promise that extends beyond the fleeting moment. She rests her head briefly against his shoulder, her warmth pressing lightly against him. There is no rush, no dramatic gesture, just quiet, mutual understanding, and the profound relief of choosing each other freely. They walk back through the park slowly, step for step, side by side. Each movement, each touch, each glance reinforces what they've both realized. They have found in each other not just comfort or attraction, but the rare, steady kind of connection that endures. For the first time, he feels completely certain of something in his life. And for the first time, she allows herself to feel the same. They are together now. And in that quiet, golden evening, the world seems exactly as it should.